quickly kind of just go over the Constitution and the 7 principles of the Constitution, just to be real clear on what the definitions are and how each of these, kind of a little bit about how they differ. So this shouldn't be a very long video. So first, the organization of the Constitution. Articles 1, 2, and 3 are probably the ones that are the most commonly discussed and maybe, excuse me, argued about, things of that nature. So the preamble is just the introduction. Article 1, 2, and 3, each one sets up the different branches of the government. So Article 1 is the legislative branch, and in many ways, the Article 1 and legislative branch, it's put there because it was seen as very important, perhaps the most important of the 3 branches, because that's the one that's most directly, closely tied to the people, because the people directly elected the members of the House of Representatives. The people had a voice in who the Senate was. The senators originally were chosen by the state legislatures. And so these are the ones that the people most closely, directly are involved with. And so the legislative branch is seen as vitally important. The closest that we have, our biggest voice in that government, in this government, is going to be from the legislative branch. Article 2 discusses well, let me talk a little bit more. Article 1 about the legislative branch, it talks about the powers of the legislative branch, the things that the government can do, and even some things specifically forbidden from the government to do. Article 2 talks about the executive branch, that's the president. Article 3 talks about the judicial branch and their role. And Article 3 is even the smallest of those 3. Article 4 states the respect each other. States respect each other. Article 5 talks about how to amend the Constitution. And Article 6, the Constitution is supreme. And so those are kind of rounding everything out there. So the introduction to the Constitution, what is it called? It's called the Preamble. And what are the words we the people, why are the words we the people significant to the Constitution? Well, so that we the people, that really goes to this idea that it is the people who are where that power comes from, that the Constitution has. It is we the people that give the government the power. So the principles of the Constitution. So popular sovereignty, this means that the people have the ultimate authority. The people have the power. So the power that government has comes from us. Popular meaning people, sovereignty meaning authority or power. So it is the people that have the power. That is where that comes from. Republicanism is that the people vote for representatives to rule on their behalf. So we elect people to make decisions for us as a nation. We don't, each one of us, vote on each issue, but elect representatives to vote on our behalf. Once they are elected, they do what they think is best, based on their convictions and how they believe a government should run. Another principle is that of limited government. And with limited government, the government cannot do what is not in the Constitution. So the idea here is that we are going to limit their power. Here's the things that are enumerated, here are the things that are expressed that the people can do, the listed powers, here's powers that are forbidden powers, and then there's some that are implied powers. In other words, these powers are necessary to carry out the powers of other other duties that you are required to do. And so then we have federalism, which is one that we've talked about a fair amount already. Its power is shared between the national and state government. And so one of the things to understand about the principles of the Constitution here, as we talked about these 4, is you'll notice that a lot of it has to do with power and who's in charge and who rules. And that's because each of these principles are designed to divide up the powers of government in different ways. So federalism divides the power between the national or the federal government and the state governments. Okay, so federal government we'll use federal government, we'll use national government, and you'll hear people talk about central government. Those 3 types of things are almost always the same, but in certain situations might be different. But when you'll hear people talk about those things, they mean the same thing usually. So there's central government or the federal government or the national government and the state governments. So federal, central, or national we kind of used interchangeably. and then the state governments. And so that federal government we're talking about is in Washington, D.C. So they have a certain amount of power. They can do certain things, but then the state governments have powers and they can do other things. And then there's some overlap where they do some of the same things, like tax. This just goes into some of the details about what are national powers, what are state powers, and then what are shared powers. And you can see here in the middle, so like maintain law and order. So we have both state governments that set up police forces to help maintain law and order, but also federal agencies like the FBI or the Drug Enforcement Agency and different federal authorities that maintain order. They both can levy taxes. So you may pay. So in Texas, we pay property taxes. We pay state. To the state, we pay sales tax. Sales tax is both state and county taxes, and then to the federal government, we pay income taxes, and many other taxes may be collected actually depending upon the types of businesses that you are in and things of that nature. Both can charter banks, both can borrow money, both can establish courts. So we have both state courts. Most criminal cases are in state courts, but not all. There are some criminal cases that might be a federal case. But then we have federal courts that also would hear laws that are broken, federal laws that are broken. So it depends on specifically the law that is being broken as to where, which court you would go to. And then you provide for public welfare. That is both a state and national issue that both can deal with. And so you can see like schools are state issues, local governments are state issues, regulating business within the state, marriage licenses, driver's licenses, teaching licenses, those things, law licenses. So a lot of licensing is a state license, not a national license. And then you can see the long list of powers that the national government has. For one that's important maybe to remember is coining money. The federal government, the national government coins money. States do not create their own money. States also cannot declare war and regulate trade between the states. We can regulate trade that is only within our state, but trade is often done interstate or even with other nations, and that is not regulated by the state but by the national government. So republicanism. Republicanism talks about that's that idea of where we elect representatives. So in Texas recently, not this past election, but in 2018, Senator Ted Cruz was running against Beto O'Rourke, and so that we elect a representative to represent us in the Senate. And so that is the way that works. We choose who we want, and the person that gets the most votes in Texas will then will be elected by the people of Texas. So what principle of government gives the people the right to vote? That would be republicanism. That gives us the right to vote. Why is it important for the federal government to, what principle of government gives people the right to vote? So that would be like popular sovereignty. We rule, so it is our voice that matters. We elect representatives, but that's not really what that question was asking. So yeah, their principle of government where people have the right to vote, that would be popular sovereignty, the people rule. Share power, that's federalism. So when we talk about sharing power, or we talk about dividing power between the national and state governments, that's federalism. Okay. More principles. Separation of powers. So we're going to continue this. Look, all these principles are primarily about either dividing up and making sure no one group has too much power. It's about protecting our liberties and our freedoms. And so separation of powers is separated. So power is separated between three branches. So not one branch does everything. The king doesn't get to say something as a law and then interpret the law, what that means, and then enforce that law. That's not okay. So we have a legislative branch that makes the laws. An executive branch that is their job to enforce those laws, and a legislative branch that is their job to interpret the law and administer justice. They each have a separate job, and that is separation of powers. Then checks and balances is an example where the president can veto a law passed by Congress. That gives the president some power over the kinds of laws that are passed. At the same time, the state governments, the legislative branch, the legislative branch has power over some of the things the president can do. So the president appoints different positions, appoints people to his cabinet, appoints people to judges, and the Senate gets to approve those or not. Individual rights are important in our system of government, and so basic liberties of citizens are protected. And so the government was created with this idea that our rights are protected and listed. One of the main ways is through the Bill of Rights that was added, but additionally, just even the fact that we get to vote and we have a voice in our government also helps to protect our individual liberties. Because if somebody passes laws that take away our liberties, then we can vote them out of office and vote people into office that will protect our liberties. All right, so what principle divides the power of the government into three different parts? That's separation of powers. So when you think of three branches of government, you should think of separation of powers. And then what principle gives one branch of government power over another branch of government? That's checks and balances. And these two questions that are in this video, these are very much the kinds of questions that end up being in tests later. So I would definitely pay attention to these questions. So that is it for the 7 principles of the Constitution. Just a real quick overview so that you have a strong understanding of what each of those are.